Today, if a random stranger somehow hacked into your home Wi-Fi to use your internet, you would be, well,
Oh,
furious.
absolutely furious.
Right. You'd change your passwords, you'd probably call your service provider, and you'd just feel completely violated.
Yeah, it's a huge invasion of privacy today.
But I want you to jump back in time with us for a second. Imagine spending the modern equivalent of, like, 7,000 pounds on a piece of technology.
Which is a massive investment.
Huge. You haul this incredibly heavy, fragile equipment into your living room. You spend days wiring it all together, writing custom code for it, and plugging it directly into your home telephone line.
And this is the family phone line, usually.
Yeah, exactly. And then, after all that, you beg strangers from all over the world to dial into your house to use it.
It sounds totally backwards to us now.
It really does. You actively want anonymous people to fill up your astronomically expensive hard drives with their text messages while you just sit back in the dark and watch it happen.
It completely breaks our modern understanding of technology ownership. I mean, we buy a device, we expect it to serve us, right?
Right.
We don't drop thousands of pounds to act as a free digital hotel for anonymous travelers.
Hmm.
But that was the defining ethos
Yeah.
of a very specific, very dedicated subculture.
And today's deep dive is built entirely around an incredible primary source that captures that subculture perfectly. We have an article from the November 1984 issue of Personal Computer World magazine.
Ah, PCW, a classic.
Yeah. It's titled It's For You, written by Peter Tootle.
Yeah.
And the magazine affectionately refers to him as the master of the Liverpool mailbox system.
I love that title, Master of the Mailbox.
It's so dramatic.
It implies this sort of wizard-like status. In 1984, the digital landscape was completely uncharted territory. And these system operators, SysOps as they were called, were essentially the wizards building the roads as they walked on them.
For anyone who hasn't dug into the pre-internet era, we should probably establish what a bulletin board system or a BBS actually was, because, it wasn't the internet.
No, not at all.
If you use Reddit, Discord, or any web forum today, you are using the spiritual successor of the BBS. But in 1984, there were no web browsers, no graphics, and absolutely no central cloud servers.
Right. It was a totally decentralized world.
A BBS was entirely text-based. It relied on one computer physically calling another computer over a standard copper telephone wire.
The server wasn't in a massive air-conditioned data center in Nevada. The server was like a beige plastic box sitting on a desk in a spare bedroom in Liverpool.
Literally just some guy's house.
Exactly. And to see what was on it, your computer had to literally dial the phone number of that house.
And the goal of this deep dive is to explore the sheer dedication that required. We are going to look at the mind-boggling financial costs, the grueling daily physical maintenance, and the absolute technical acrobatics required to run one of these systems in 1984.
It's a wild ride.
We are painting a picture of the pioneers, or maybe monomaniacs is the better word, who paved the way for the modern internet. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the massive costs and the hardware headaches, let's start with human psychology.
The why.
Yeah, why? What possessed someone to undertake this monumental task?
Well, Tootle does a great job of dividing the operators into two distinct groups to answer that. You have the businesses and you have the hobbyists.
Okay.
The business side is fairly dry. Maybe a company needs to transfer inventory files to field staff. But the hobbyists are the interesting ones. Turtle identifies their motivation as a deep, almost obsessive interest in something he calls micro-communications.
Micro-communications. It sounds like a college course.
It does, but when you read Tootle's actual description, it's incredibly romantic. He explicitly compares the BBS scene to ham radio.
Ham radio, right?
The ham radio analogy is the perfect lens for this. Think about what a ham radio operator does. They aren't broadcasting to deliver a profound message or host a talk show.
No, it's just about reaching out.
Exactly. They spend hours tuning dials, trying to bounce a radio signal off the Earth ionosphere just to get a brief call sign from someone in Japan.
Wow.
They log the contact, maybe talk about the weather, and that's it. The thrill isn't the content of the conversation. The thrill is the physical reality of the contact itself. The BBS took that primal urge for connection and digitized it.
Tootle talks about the strange fascination of watching your own microcomputer respond to commands typed by a completely invisible person.
It must have been surreal.
I am trying to put myself in that headspace. It's midnight in 1984. You're sitting in your living room. The only light is the green glow of a CRT monitor, and suddenly the cursor on your screen starts moving.
Like a ghost.
Yeah. Words are appearing, but you aren't touching the keyboard. A ghost in the machine is typing.
And that ghost could be the teenager who lives across the street, or it could be a researcher 3,000 miles away.
It could be anyone.
For someone in 1984, before we took instant global communication for granted, watching that cursor move under someone else's control must have felt like genuine magic. It was the physical proof that you were no longer isolated.
If we look at the financial arrangement of this magic, Tootle points out a very cheeky perk for the hobbyist.
Oh, this is fascinating.
If you are the person running the BBS, you are actually protecting yourself from the biggest expense of 1980s telecommunications.
Which was the long-distance phone bill.
Exactly. Because the callers are the ones actively dialing in to reach your board, they are footing the massive tariffs to the phone company.
It creates a fascinating economic inversion. The SysOp is providing the expensive computer hardware and the constant maintenance, but the users are paying the telecom monopolies for the privilege of traveling the copper wires to get there.
So the host isn't paying for the guest's travel.
Right. The system operator was essentially a host throwing a massive party, but dodging the biggest tax associated with the era.
It reminds me of someone deciding to construct a beautiful, elaborate community park right in their own backyard.
Oh, I like that analogy.
You buy the expensive playground equipment, you pay for the landscaping, you do all the backbreaking daily maintenance out of your own pocket, and you don't charge an entry fee.
You just leave the gates open.
Yeah, you do all of this just for the quiet satisfaction of opening the gates and watching strangers from around the world come and enjoy what you built while you just sit on your porch observing.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these early hobbyists were inventing the concept of online community out of thin air.
They really were.
In an era long before algorithms were feeding us content, this was the physical manifestation of a digital urge. They were craving a communal space to exist together.
Because it didn't exist anywhere else.
Because that space didn't exist, they had to build the infrastructure themselves, brick by digital brick, paying for the concrete themselves.
Let's talk about the cost of that concrete, because that's where this gets really wild. Driven by that pure desire for connection, these hobbyists had to open their wallets incredibly wide.
Immensely wide.
To truly grasp the scale of their dedication, we can't just look at a 1984 price tag of a few £100s and shrug. We have our economic sources here providing a historical inflation multiplier to bring these 1984 British pounds into current 2026 values.
Right, to make it real for us today.
It's roughly a 4.17x multiplier.
And applying that 2026 multiplier completely shatters the illusion that this was just a casual weekend hobby like building model airplanes.
It was not cheap.
The economics transform it into a staggering financial commitment. Let's look at the foundational layer first, the software.
Tootle notes that commercial BBS software packages, he specifically mentions one called CBBS, could cost several £100s. He uses £300 as a working benchmark for 1984.
So we take that £300, apply the 4.17 multiplier, and you're looking at an eye-watering £1,250 in 2026 money.
£1,250.
Let that sink in. You're paying well over £1,000 just for the software.
And this isn't software with a beautiful graphical interface, slick animations, or cloud backups.
Not at all.
This is purely text-based code that simply allows your computer to understand a phone call and organize basic text files.
And that's before you've even bought the hardware to connect to the phone line.
Right. Tootle mentions the modem. Not just any modem, but a standard auto-answer modem, which was £150 in 1984.
Run the multiplier on that one.
Run the multiplier, and that equates to roughly £625 today. Over £600 for a device whose sole purpose is to screech at varying frequencies over a copper wire.
It feels steep, but the true financial shock comes when Tootle casually discusses storage space.
Oh, the storage. This is my favorite part.
He outlines what we can essentially call the 1 megabyte dream. He advises his readers that 1 megabyte is approximately the minimum amount of storage you need to think about if you want to run a respectable board.
Wait, hold on. 1 single megabyte. Let's put that in modern context for a second.
It's nothing today.
If I pull out my phone right now and take a standard high-resolution photo of you, that single image is going to be about 5 or 6 megabytes.
Right.
We are talking about a time when the ultimate luxury was a fraction of a single iPhone photo.
The scale is almost comical to a modern ear. But in 1984, upgrading from fragile floppy disks to a dedicated hard drive Usually a 5 megabyte or 10 megabyte setup was an incredibly serious upgrade.
It was game-changing for them.
It fundamentally changed how fast the BBS could operate and gave you vast, reliable space for text messages. But that luxury cost between 500 and 1,000 pounds in 1984.
I have to pause and do the math on that because it's breaking my brain. Applying the multiplier, that means operators were spending the 2026 equivalent of 2,085 to 4,170 pounds.
Thousands of pounds.
Just for a hard drive. I'm trying to picture the mindset here. Would you, or anyone listening right now, willingly go out and spend 4,000 pounds on a piece of storage equipment just to let absolute strangers log in and fill it up with text files?
No one would do that today.
It's absolute madness. It completely proves the point that these operators were driven by an unadulterated, irrational passion.
We really have to analyze the pricing psychology of that specific era to make sense of it. In the early 80s, computing was not a ubiquitous consumer commodity.
You didn't just pick one up at the supermarket.
No, you didn't buy a computer the way you bought a toaster or a television. It was an elite, highly technical pursuit. Dropping 7,000 pounds in today's money on a hobby wasn't seen as buying an appliance.
What was it like then?
It was akin to buying a small sailboat or investing in high-end automotive restoration. It demanded immense disposable income and immense personal sacrifice.
It acted as a filter, essentially. If you're dropping the equivalent of a down payment on a house just to run a text board, you're going to take it very seriously.
Exactly the point. This extraordinarily high financial barrier created a highly invested, deeply committed subculture. You care deeply about the uptime of the system.
Right, because you paid so much for it.
You care about your reputation as a SysOp among the network of other SysOps. The financial pain ensured that the people running these systems were passionately dedicated to the actual craft and engineering of microcommunications.
Let's get into the engineering of it then. Let's say our 1984 hobbyist is sufficiently monomaniacal, they've emptied their 2026 equivalent bank account, and they have boxes of expensive gear in their living room.
A pile of boxes.
What physical equipment are they actually wiring together?
Well, Untold provides a fantastic anatomical breakdown of the minimum requirements.
Yeah.
It begins, obviously, with the microcomputer. What stands out in the article is the sheer diversity of the hardware landscape.
It wasn't just Macs and PCs back then.
Not at all. He notes that almost any micro will do. You had people running BBSs on Sinclair Spectrums, IBM PCs, Apple IIs, Tandy TRS-80s, and even massive corporate mini-computers.
So the brand of the computer didn't really matter. It was a completely fragmented ecosystem. But how did all these vastly different machines talk to the phone line?
They all had to funnel through a universal bottleneck, the RS-232 interface.
The RS-232.
Tootle has a few charming typos in the original text where he calls it the RS-233 or RS-23333, but he's talking about the classic RS-232 serial standard. And this is where we have to dive deep into the gritty electrical engineering of the era.
I'm picturing those massive, chunky connectors at the 2 rows of tiny pins, usually 25 pins, right? Screwed into the back of the computer.
That's the one.
How does that actually orchestrate a phone call?
Let's break down that 25-pin cable. It wasn't just a simple pipe for data. Yes, you had your 2 core data lines, 1 pin dedicated exclusively to transmitting data out, and another pin dedicated exclusively to receiving data in.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the magic and the absolute fragility of the system lay in the control lines. These were separate electrical pins that acted as the nervous system for the connection. And Tootle emphasizes that the absolute most critical of these was the carrier detect circuit.
Carrier detect. I'm struggling with the mechanics here. I'm picturing an old rotary phone connection. How is a computer in 1984 physically hearing this connection, and what happens electrically if it drops?
So when a caller dials in and the 2 modems connect, they establish a continuous, high-pitched analog screech. That is the carrier tone.
That classic dial-up sound.
Exactly. As long as that screech is happening, the modems know the phone line is open. The modem takes that analog audio screech, turns it into an electrical voltage, and sends that voltage constantly down pin 8 of the RS-232 cable to the computer.
Wait, down pin 8 specifically?
Specifically pin 8. That constant electrical voltage on pin 8 is the carrier detect signal. It tells the software the human is still on the other end.
So it's literally a physical electrical pulse keeping the software alive? But phone lines in the 1980s were notoriously terrible.
Oh, they were awful.
They crackled, they popped, and connections dropped all the time. Or, a caller would just rudely unplug their phone from the wall without logging off properly.
And that is where the disaster happens. If that audio tone stops abruptly, the voltage on pin 8 drops to 0.
Instant 0.
The RS-232 interface has to instantly recognize that voltage drop and interrupt the computer's processor to say the caller vanished.
Mm.
If it doesn't, like if your wiring is bad or the software isn't listening to pin 8, the BBS software has no idea the person left.
What happens to the software then? Does it just crash?
It enters a state of digital purgatory.
Oh, no.
It sits in an infinite loop, waiting for a keystroke from a user who is no longer there. It will never receive that keystroke. So the phone line stays locked open, the modem stays off the hook, and anyone else who tries to call gets a busy signal forever.
So the whole board is just frozen.
The entire system is effectively dead until the SysOp physically walks into the room, realizes what happened, and hits the physical reset button on the machine.
It's like being in a conversation where the other person turns and walks away mid-sentence, and you just stand there staring at an empty wall, mouth open, waiting for them to finish their thought for the next 12 hours.
That is the exact vulnerability. The software has to be violently jolted out of its wait state by the carrier detect dropping, forcing it to run a routine that hangs up the modem and resets to a standby mode.
Okay, so that's the interface cable. Let's talk about the modem itself. Till stresses that you absolutely must have an auto-answer modem.
Which is pretty crucial.
Which makes sense. You can't be expected to sprint from your kitchen to the computer to manually type an answer command every time the phone rings at 3 a.m.
True, but Untold draws a very important distinction between two types of auto-answer modems: intelligent modems and dumb modems.
Okay, what's the difference?
The intelligent modem, often pioneered by companies like Hayes, does all the heavy lifting autonomously. When the physical phone line rings, the modem's internal processor detects it, physically engages the phone line, negotiates that screeching carrier tone, and manages the connection.
So the computer just chills out.
Exactly. The computer software is mostly just observing until the connection is stable.
I assume the dumb modem requires a lot more babysitting from the SysOp's expensive software.
Oh, a dumb modem is essentially just an alarm bell. It has no internal logic to answer a phone.
None at all.
None. When the 90 volts of alternating current from a telephone ring hits the dumb modem, it simply sends a voltage spike down another specific wire in that RS-232 cable, specifically the ring indicator signal on pin 22.
So pin 22 is just shouting at the computer, "Hey, I think the phone might be ringing."
Precisely. The modem just sits there passively. It's entirely up to the SysOp's software to constantly monitor pin 22, recognize the pulse, decide if it wants to accept a call right now, and then explicitly send a command back to the modem saying, okay, engage the relay and answer the line.
It was incredibly manual at the software level.
Very manual.
That level of micromanagement is fascinating. And once the modem does answer, Untold talks about the speed of these connections. He mentions the U.S. standard dual-speed modems, specifically the Bell 103, which ran at 300 and 300, and the Bell 212, which ran at 12 and 200.
The cutting edge of speed then.
I need you to explain how these machines negotiated speed, because reading Untold's description, it sounds incredibly hacky. There's no modern digital handshake where the computers instantly swap configuration files, right?
Far from it. When a caller dialed in, the answering modem had absolutely no idea how fast the incoming modem was capable of talking.
Because it's just listening to noise.
It's listening to an analog hiss, so how do you solve that?
Yeah.
The standardized workaround was that the caller, upon connecting, would manually tap the enter key, the carriage return, a couple of times.
Wait, the modem is expecting a human to hit a key? Does it literally measure the physical sound wave of that specific key press?
It measures the electrical pulse width of the data representing that carriage return. A carriage return sent at 300 baud takes a longer physical amount of time to transmit than a carriage return sent at 1200 baud.
Oh, wow.
The answering modem analyzes the incoming analog signal, measures the duration of that specific pulse, and uses that measurement to deduce, this person is talking to me at 1200 baud. I will switch my circuitry to match that speed.
It is a crude, brilliant piece of analog deduction.
It really is.
I love that. But even with those clever dual-speed modems, Untold notes that the vast, vast majority of systems in 1984 were running at the base speed of 300 BPs, or bits per second. Let's put 300 BPs into perspective for a modern user. That translates to roughly 30 characters appearing on your screen per second.
It is agonizingly slow.
I was laughing out loud when I read this because a moderately fast typist today can literally outrun the modem.
Easily.
You could sit at your keyboard, type out a full sentence, and your physical fingers are moving faster than the modem can transmit those letters down the phone line.
It's the equivalent of reading a book where the letters are being painted onto the page one by one by a very slow artist while you wait.
And this agonizing 30 character per second speed limit explains another piece of hardware Teal recommends, a printer. When I first read that, I thought, why on earth do you need a physical printer for a digital bulletin board? It seems entirely redundant.
It does seem redundant until you understand the logging requirements. The SysOp wanted a live, unalterable record of who was logging in, what passwords they were trading, and what commands they were executing, in case someone was trying to hack the system or crash it.
So they would hook up a noisy dot matrix printer to the microcomputer.
Right next to the bed, usually.
And the only reason a clunky mechanical 1984 dot matrix printer could easily act as a real-time log is because the data was coming in at 30 characters per second. The printer wasn't breaking a sweat.
No, it had plenty of time.
It was just leisurely slamming its pins against the ribbon, tapping out a letter at a time at exactly the speed the modem was trickling the data in.
What's fascinating here is how these brutal physical limitations, specifically that 70 characters per second speed limit, inherently shape the psychology and the social interaction of the BBS culture.
Oh, so?
Well, today, we scroll mindlessly. We consume thousands of images and thousands of words a minute without thinking. But at 30 CPs, every single word took time to appear on your screen.
And time is money, especially when you are paying long-distance phone rates by the minute.
Exactly. Because there's a financial cost to staying online and a temporal cost to reading long messages. Callers were forced to be deliberate. They had to be concise.
You couldn't just spam people.
No, you didn't post a massive rambling manifesto unless it was truly important, because you knew it would take the next caller 10 minutes just to watch it draw on their screen.
Yeah.
The hardware constraints forced a specific kind of thoughtful, purposeful communication that is largely absent from modern social media.
The technology literally dictated the cadence and the quality of the conversation. I love that insight. So let's step back. You have this incredibly expensive, painfully slow pile of electronics wired together in your home. You've conquered the RS-232 interface.
You're halfway there.
But hardware is just dumb metal and silicon without a brain. It needs the storage architecture and the software to actually govern the caller's experience. Which brings us back to the 1 megabyte dream and the terrifying realities of 1984 storage media.
Tootle points out that if you were desperate and couldn't afford disk drives, it was theoretically possible to run a basic BBS system, keeping all its information strictly in RAM, the computer's temporary random access memory.
Running a server entirely in RAM sounds like walking a tightrope across a canyon without a safety net. I'm assuming that was a terrible idea.
It was an incredibly dangerous way to operate. RAM is volatile memory. It only holds data as long as electrical current is flowing through it.
Right.
If a user left a long, brilliant message, it lived purely as electrical charge in the microchips. If you had a single power failure, even a momentary brownout where the lights flickered for a fraction of a second, the entire state of the BBS was permanently, instantly wiped from existence.
Oh my God.
Every message, every user account, every configuration setting, gone.
Complete digital amnesia every time there's a thunderstorm.
Exactly.
So relying on RAM wasn't practical for a serious board. This meant operators heavily relied on dual floppy disk drives. And when I say heavily relied, I mean they tortured these drives. We're talking about physical magnetic media. Can you explain the mechanical reality of running a server off floppy disks?
We have to remember how a floppy drive works. Unlike a modern hard drive, where the read-write head flies on a microscopic cushion of air above the platter, a floppy drive head physically touches the magnetic mylar disk.
It actually touches it.
It literally rests on the surface.
Carol.
Every time someone logged in, every time they requested to read a message, the mechanical head had to clamp down, the disk spun up, and the head dragged across the surface to find the data.
So it's essentially scraping the disk.
It is actively wearing out the magnetic oxide coating through physical friction. Consumer floppy drives were designed for a single user, occasionally saving a word process document or loading a game.
They weren't made for server loads.
They were never engineered for continuous, server-like, 2047 random read-write cycles. The wear and tear was immense. Disks would literally shed their magnetic coating and fail constantly.
Which perfectly explains why that 4,000-pound equivalent 1 megabyte hard drive was the absolute holy grail.
It was life-changing for them.
It wasn't just about the massive space of a megabyte. It fundamentally removed the physical friction. You weren't waiting for a mechanical arm to slowly seek across a scraping piece of plastic. It sped up the entire operation of the board.
Exactly. And once you solved the terrifying storage crisis, You had to choose your software. We touched on the staggering economics earlier, the 1,250 pounds equivalent for commercial packages like CBBS. Tootle mentions that CBBS ran on the CP/M operating system.
I need you to pause and explain CPM because I think a lot of modern listeners have no idea what that is, and it seems crucial to understanding the software landscape of 1984.
CP/M stands for Control Program for Microcomputers. Created by Gary Kildall, it was essentially the granddaddy of standard operating systems, the direct predecessor to MS-DOS.
Okay, so pre-DOS.
Right. Before CP/M, every single computer had its own proprietary way of talking to its disk drives and screen. CP/M provided a standardized layer. If you wrote a program for CP/M, it could theoretically run on dozens of different computer brands as long as they had a Z80 or 8080 processor. It was the first attempt at a universal software platform.
So buying a commercial package like CBBS meant you were buying into the standardized, professional, but very expensive CP/M ecosystem.
Sure.
But Tootle also highlights the alternative. The public domain software born from the early hacker ethos.
He explicitly mentions systems like Remote CP/M, or the C-language Citadel system. These were highly capable BBS programs that were distributed entirely for free by local computer user groups.
It sets up a philosophical divide right from the start of the digital age, the polished, expensive commercial software versus the community-built open-source style code that you had to compile and tinker with yourself.
It's a debate we still have today.
Yeah. But whether you paid £1,000 for it or got it on a free copied floppy disk, the actual UI, the user interface and user experience was light years away from what we expect today.
Oh, UI and UX in 1984 did not mean graphical windows, drop-down menus, or using a mouse.
No point and click.
The mouse barely existed outside of Xerox labs and early Macs. User experience meant pure, unforgiving, text-based command lines. You connected, you got a text prompt, and you had to type exact commands to navigate.
Tootle notes an interesting silver lining to the agonizing 30 characters per second speed limit, though.
The speed actually helped them.
Yeah, because the data transfer was so incredibly slow, the software didn't actually need to be written in hyper-fast, highly optimized code. He says even a slow, interpreted programming language like BASIC was fast enough to run the main logic routines of the BBS.
Right, because the computer spent 99% of its time just waiting for the modem to finish sending a letter.
The processor was essentially twiddling its thumbs between keystrokes. However, the software had to do some incredibly heavy lifting behind the scenes just to make that text readable for the caller. The background tasks really paint a picture of the absolute chaos of 1980s computing standards.
The fragmentation of the hardware was immense. You have callers dialing in with Apple IIs, Sinclair Spectrums, Commodore 64s, IBM PCs, and the nightmare for the SysOp is that none of these companies perfectly agreed on how text should be formatted, transmitted, or displayed on a screen.
We take the universal text standard ASCII for granted now.
You really do.
But back then, implementations varied wildly. So what does the BBS software have to do? It has to run custom machine code routines in the background to act as a real-time translator.
Tootle specifically mentions a routine to convert lowercase letters to uppercase.
I was baffled by this. Why on earth is the server actively intercepting letters and capitalizing them?
Because some of the callers were dialing in with highly primitive computers or very cheap terminal software that physically lacked the capability to display lowercase letters.
What? Really?
Yes. Early machines, like the original Apple II, only had the hardware chips to generate uppercase letters on the screen to save money. If the BBS sent a lowercase a to an Apple II, the caller's screen might just show a glitching square, a weird symbol, or crash their terminal software entirely.
So the BBS software is literally catching every single character typed by user A, looking at it, realizing it's a lowercase letter, and forcibly capitalizing it before sending it out to user B, just in case user B owns a cheap computer.
Precisely. And there were even more obscure routines, like feeding nulls and line feeds after carriage returns.
Okay, I need an explanation of a null and a line feed. It sounds like typographic plumbing.
It is typographic plumbing. When a user hit the Enter key, they sent a carriage return command. On some computers, a carriage return moved the cursor to the start of the current line, but it didn't move it down to the next line.
So they would just overwrite their own words.
If the BBS didn't intervene, the user would just start typing over their own text on the exact same line, creating an unreadable mess. So the BBS software had to detect the carriage return and artificially inject a line feed command to force the caller's cursor down one row.
Wow. And what are the nulls?
Nulls are literally blank characters that do nothing.
Why send nothing?
because some mechanical teleprinters or early slow terminals took a fraction of a second to physically return their print head to the left side of the page. If the BBS kept sending data during that fraction of a second, the letters would get printed in the middle of the air while the head was moving.
Oh, I see.
So the BDS would inject nulls, wasting time just to give the caller's hardware a chance to physically catch up.
That is wild. The BBS software wasn't just managing messages, it was acting as a real-time diplomatic translator for a wildly incompatible hardware landscape across the entire country. The user experience wasn't about making things pretty with fonts. It was about injecting blank spaces just to prevent a total mechanical communication collapse.
The SysOp was essentially a digital mechanic. They were constantly tuning the engine of the server while it's running down the highway just to keep the disparate cars of the callers on the road.
And that mechanical aspect brings us to the next massive hurdle of the SysOp lifestyle. Because getting the hardware stable, buying the hard drive, and writing the software translation routines was really only day one.
Then the real work starts.
The true test of a SysOp's resolve was the grueling, unending, daily housekeeping grind.
Tootle is very explicit about this in the article. He warns his readers that running a BBS was not something to be taken on casually or on the spur of the moment. He states that operators had to commit to a bare minimum of 30 minutes a day of strict housekeeping. Every single day, without fail.
30 minutes a day just to keep the lights on. Let's look at the sheer volume of traffic they were dealing with to justify that time. Tootle says most full-time public BBSs could expect around 40 daily calls.
40 a day.
Now, to someone listening today, getting 40 visitors to your website in a 24-hour period sounds like a dead, abandoned project. But in 1984, 40 daily callers over a single 300 baud phone line was considered a roaring full-time success.
It was a success because each of those 40 callers took up a massive block of time. If you connect at 30 characters per second, reading a long message thread might take you 20 or 30 minutes.
Because it's drawing so slowly.
Writing a reply takes another 10 minutes. So a single caller ties up the line for half an hour, multiply that out, and those 40 callers are keeping the modem engaged for 15 to 20 hours a day. The phone line was practically glowing red with constant traffic.
And all that traffic generates data. And unlimited floppy disk space or even that precious 1 megabyte hard drive, that space vanished incredibly fast.
So fast.
So the SysOp has to sit down every evening for this 30-minute chore. What are they actually doing at the keyboard?
According to Tootle, the first task is manual deletion. The SysOp is physically reading through the system, finding messages that have already been read by their intended recipients, or finding public posts that are no longer relevant, and permanently deleting them to claw back a few precious kilobytes of storage space.
They are also manually monitoring the public boards for bad language, which Tootle Riley notes does happen, much to the dismay of the polite 1980s computer enthusiasts.
They're acting as editors, curators, and moral censors all rolled into one.
It's exactly like being a modern-day Reddit moderator. You're scanning forums, deleting irrelevant posts, banning trolls who use bad language. But there is a terrifying physical twist to this 1980s version.
The hardware failure.
Right. Instead of just clicking a button to delete a digital comment in the cloud, you are actively managing failing physical hardware.
This goes back to our discussion of floppy disk wear and tear. Having 40 people remotely scraping the magnetic oxide off your disks day after day meant the disks were constantly on the verge of physical failure.
Tootle explicitly lists rescuing much-used files that have become damaged as a standard daily chore.
Because disk errors were an everyday reality. A user would dial in, try to leave a long message, and right in the middle of it, a worn-out sector on the floppy disk would fail to magnetize properly.
And then what?
The file structure corrupts. The system crashes. The SysOp then has to sit down, boot up dedicated disk utility software, look at the raw hexadecimal data on the disk, and try to piece the shattered text file back together manually. Or they have to restore it from a backup floppy they hopefully made the day before.
It is digital janitorial work of the highest stress level. The physical infrastructure of your community is always on the verge of collapsing under the weight of those 40 visitors.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
You've spent thousands of pounds, you're translating lowercase letters in machine code, you're sweeping up digital garbage every night, and you're praying your floppy drive doesn't eat a disk. But here is the craziest part of the entire operation. Dealing with the hardware wear and tear is one thing, but how do those 40 people actually reach you?
This is where we hit the massive logistical bottleneck. The telephone line.
Right. If you can't afford a dedicated, expensive second phone line specifically and exclusively for your BBS, you run into a domestic nightmare. And I want to spend some time on this because the solution they came up with is brilliant.
Tootle draws a sharp distinction between a 24-hour system and a part-time system.
Oh.
A true 24-hour BBS absolutely demanded a dedicated second phone line installed by the phone company. You couldn't just give up your household's only ability to make voice calls forever.
But getting a second line installed just for a hobby was a massive financial hurdle on top of the thousands you've already spent on equipment. So many hobbyists ran part-time systems, say, turning the computer on from 6 p.m. to midnight, using the family's main shared home phone line.
And the domestic problems with this shared line approach are immediately obvious and highly combustible.
Oh, I bet.
First, Tootle notes that no matter how clearly you specify your system hours on the login screen, even if you explicitly say only call between 6 p.m. and midnight, callers are going to ignore it. They forget the time zones, they ignore the rules, or they just try their luck to see if the board is up early.
Here's where the domestic warfare begins. Imagine the sheer chaos in the household. Imagine the SysOp's mother or father sitting in the living room on a Tuesday afternoon. The home phone rings.
They think it's a friend.
They assume it's a friend or a family member. They pick up the receiver, put it to their ear, say hello, and instead of a human voice, they get blasted with 90 decibels of ear piercing, 2100 hertz modem screeching. It's a teenager in Liverpool trying to download a file, violently assaulting their eardrums.
It would be infuriating. And it worked both ways. Tootle points out that normal people, say a relative trying to reach the family, might call during the evening when the BBS is active.
So they get the computer.
Right. The modem answers immediately and blasts them with the carrier tone. The relative assumes the phone line is horribly broken, hangs up, and actually reports a fault to the telephone company.
Tootle specifically cites this domestic aggravation as the primary reason many BBSs ended up closing down. The family just couldn't take the modem screeching anymore. It was destroying the peace of the home.
So you have an engineering problem born of domestic necessity. You have one single copper phone line. It needs to be a voice phone for the family during the day, and a data line for the BBS at night. But humans are unpredictable and won't respect the schedule. How do you separate the traffic without buying a second line?
The solution the SysOps developed is quite possibly the most brilliant analog life hack of the 1980s. It's called the ringback method.
It is an incredibly elegant, software-driven solution to a very messy analog problem. Tootle outlines how it works from the user's perspective first. If you're a computer user wanting to log into a ringback BBS, you dial the number, you listen to it ring exactly once. Then you immediately hang up the phone.
Okay, so you deliberately abandon the call.
Yes. You wait a few seconds, and then you immediately redial the exact same number.
It's a literal secret knock.
Exactly. And the modem on the SysOp's desk is programmed by the software to only answer the phone on that second immediate call. It completely ignores the first call.
The genius of this is how it protects the family. If a normal person calls the house to speak to the mother, they just dial the number and let it ring normally. Ring, ring, ring.
The modem stays asleep.
The modem ignores it because it didn't hear the secret knock. The phone rings audibly in the house, someone walks over, picks it up, and has a normal voice conversation. No screeching modem. But if a computer calls, it executes the secret knock ring once, hang up, call right back, and the modem intercepts the second call before the family even has time to get out of their chairs. It perfectly separates voice traffic from data traffic on a single piece of copper wire.
But the technical implementation of this, how the software actually accomplishes this, is where the SysOps really flex their programming muscles. Because how does a computer actually know a phone rang, stopped ringing, and rang again? Remember our discussion about the dumb modems and the RS-232 cable?
Right, pin 22, the ring indicator circuit that just acts as an alarm bell.
Yes. Tootle explains that the SysOp would write custom software that constantly monitors the voltage on pin 22. When the phone rings, the 90 volts of alternating current causes pin 22 to send a pulse to the computer. The software sits there and counts the pulses. 1 pulse, 2 pulses. If the pulses stop after 1 or 2 rings, the software knows the caller hung up.
It recognizes the first half of the secret knock.
Exactly. The moment it detects that hang-up, the software immediately initiates a timing loop. In 1984 programming, a timing loop is literally just a piece of code, like a 4RNXT loop, that tells the processor to count from 1 to 10,000, effectively wasting CPU cycles for exactly 30 seconds to act as a countdown clock.
So the computer is holding its breath for 30 seconds.
Yes. While it's counting down, it keeps watching pin 22. If pin 22 pulses again, meaning the phone is ringing a second time inside that 30-second window, the software breaks out of the loop and fires off the command to the modem. Answer the line immediately.
That is so smart.
And if the 30-second timer runs out and the phone hasn't rung again, the software shrugs, assumes it was a wrong number, and resets itself to standby mode.
I am in awe of that. Tootle notes you could also accomplish this purely in hardware, wiring together physical ring detector circuits and 555 timer chips with a soldering iron if you couldn't write the software logic.
What is so deeply impressive about ringback is the lateral thinking. These operators were bypassing massive physical infrastructure limitations, the inability to afford a second telephone line, by manipulating the analog telephone network's most basic, primitive signaling mechanism, the mechanical ringing of a bell.
They turned a bell into a password.
They turned the duration of a ringing bell into a programmable data point to route traffic. It is the absolute pinnacle of early hacker culture, taking a system, understanding its fundamental mechanics, and using it in a way that telephone engineers never designed it to be used, purely to solve a local problem.
It's the ultimate cat and mouse game with the telephone monopoly and your own annoyed family members. So let's take a massive step back and survey the landscape we've just built. We have a hobbyist who has made a massive financial investment, dropping thousands of pounds equivalent on hardware and software.
We have the grueling daily physical labor of scraping floppy disks and rescuing corrupted files.
We have complex machine code programming to translate lowercase letters and execute timing loops. And we have the sheer social annoyance of managing a shared phone line. Given all of this friction, all of this pain, and all of this cost, surely these people figured out a way to monetize it. You can't put yourself through that much stress just for the love of the game forever, right?
You would naturally assume that a service this complex and this in demand would command a price. But Tootle provides a very sobering, almost fatalistic take on the business of running a BBS. He states point blank to his readers, "You are very, very unlikely to make a BBS pay its own way directly."
I find that incredibly hard to believe given the value they were providing. They're hosting the only digital communities in existence. Why couldn't they simply put up a paywall and charge a monthly subscription for access?
They could try, and some ambitious SysOps certainly did try to charge subscriptions. But Tootle explains the fundamental fatal flaw in the subscription model in 1984. He asks a very simple economic question. Why should a user pay you a subscription fee to log into your board when they can hang up the phone, dial a different number, and log into another hobbyist BBS for absolutely nothing?
Because the hobbyists are giving it away for free.
Exactly. The hobbyists poisoned the well for monetization. Tootle notes that unless your paid BBS had incredibly unique, custom-written software, or a massive stash of highly desirable, cracked software files that literally no one else in the country had, callers would simply balk at the toll booth.
They'd just go somewhere else.
They would bypass your paywall and dial into a free community system down the road.
I have to pause and ask you about this because it feels so incredibly relevant to the struggles of modern media and tech companies today. Why were these early digital pioneers, the very people who understood how difficult and expensive it was to build the system, so completely resistant to paying for access to it?
This raises an important question, maybe the most important historical question of the entire era. It's one of the most lasting, fundamental legacies of the BBS scene. The immense struggle with digital monetization and the deeply ingrained user expectation that online access should be free did not start with the modern internet.
It wasn't just a dot-com bubble thing.
No, it didn't start with the dot-com bubble offering free email, and it didn't start with Napster making music free. That intense friction between free community access and paid subscriptions was firmly established right here in the text-based menus of 1984.
It was baked into the DNA of online culture from the very first phone call.
It was inescapable. Because the monomaniacal hobbyists started the movement out of sheer passion and a desire for connection, they established an absolute baseline expectation that the connection itself should not be commodified.
Right, they set the precedent.
Once that precedent was set, once the community decided the digital space was a shared commons, it became nearly impossible for anyone to walk it back and ask people to open their wallets for basic access.
So if direct subscriptions to the digital space rarely worked, what were the viable business applications? Because Tootle does mention businesses running these systems. If they aren't charging subscriptions, how are they justifying the 7,000-pound hardware cost?
The only viable ways to make money with a BBS were when the bulletin board was directly tied to an existing physical offline business. Tude lists several very practical applications: electronic mail ordering, cataloging, and checking stock levels.
Ah, I see. So you aren't selling the BBS itself. The BBS is just a fancy new tool to sell physical goods.
Precisely. The BBS is a loss leader. A company might have a team of field sales staff who are driving around the country, frequently absent from the home office.
So they use it to communicate.
Instead of trying to coordinate phone calls during business hours, the staff could use primitive portable computers, acoustic couplers attached to payphones, to dial into the company BBS at 2 a.m. to pass their sales orders back, or to check the stock levels for the next client meeting.
It was acting as an intranet before the concept of an intranet even existed.
Exactly. Yeah. It was an extension of the business infrastructure. It could be a 24-hour customer support portal where users leave questions, or a logistics tool for employees. But it was never the primary product. The BBS itself didn't generate revenue. It facilitated offline sales or saved the company money on administrative coordination.
And even with those business applications, Tootle notes that very few BBSs actually turned a net profit for their operators. The commitment of time, the maintenance, the hardware degradation, it was an immense sink of resources.
A massive sink.
He points out a tragic irony for the hobbyist. You were dedicating your incredibly expensive microcomputer to this public task, which meant you often couldn't actually use it for yourself. If you wanted to play a game or write a document, you had to take the phone off the hook, shut down the BBS, and then sit there feeling guilty about all the callers getting a busy signal while you tried to enjoy the computer you paid for.
The guilt of the SysOp. It's a heavy crown to wear. You build the park, but you can't play in it because you're too busy raking the leaves and fixing the swings.
It really is an incredible journey when you lay it all out. To briefly recap the sheer scale of what we've covered today, we are looking at individuals who willingly spent the 2026 equivalent of thousands upon thousands of pounds on hard drives and modems.
Wires everywhere.
They spent hours wrangling the electrical voltages of pin 22 on RS-232 interfaces to prevent their software from entering infinite loops. They invented ingenious analog hacks like the ringback secret knock to share a single phone line without driving their families insane.
And the cleaning.
Right. They committed to daily, highly stressful digital janitorial work, rescuing corrupted floppy disks, all while operating at a painfully slow speed of 30 characters per second.
And they did all of this almost entirely without the expectation of financial reward. They did it out of a pure fascination with microcommunications. They did it to build the foundational architecture of digital community.
It's something I really want you, the listener, to think about the next time you pick up your smartphone. You tap an app icon, and instantly, effortlessly, and completely for free, you are connected with millions of people around the globe.
Without even thinking about it.
There is zero friction. You don't think about carrier detect signals, you don't think about baud rates, and you certainly don't think about the physical wear and tear on the server hard drives. But the foundation of that frictionless, invisible experience you enjoy today was built on the highly friction, incredibly expensive, and deeply personal dedication of these early 1984 monomaniacs.
They fought the hard battles.
They fought the hardware, they fought the phone companies, and they fought the limits of basic programming so that we wouldn't have to.
They absolutely did. They mapped the territory we all live in now.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought I want to throw out there for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. We've talked so much today about the extreme difficulty of this era, the massive financial cost, the agonizingly slow speed, the manual labor of typing precise commands, the literal physical degradation of the disks.
It was incredibly hard work.
Yeah. Today, our internet is the exact opposite. It is frictionless, it is largely anonymous, and it is free. But we also constantly complain about the quality of our modern digital interactions. So the question is, did the sheer difficulty, the extreme friction, and the immense personal and financial cost required to build and access those early BBS networks make those 1984 digital communities inherently more valuable, more intimate, and more respectful than the internet we use today?
That's a great question.
Does taking away the effort to connect also take away the meaning of the connection? Something to mull over. Till next time.